Good morning, everybody. I would like to welcome you to the Southwest Monarch Study celebration of Pollinator Week. We have several wonderful speakers to share the information with you and also their wisdom and excitement about the pollinators they are about to talk about. And our first one today will be Dr. Julie Stromberg, Professor Emeritus in plant ecology from Arizona State. During our presentations, we invite you to use the chat at the bottom of your screen. If you highlight your screen at the bottom and type in any questions, we'll be taking most of our questions at the end of our presentations, but we'll see how many of these we could work in. And Julie, please start your presentation about pollinators.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here and welcome everyone. Yes, I'm a botanist. A little bit more about my background. I'm a botanist, a plant ecologist. I retired from ASU about a couple of years ago. And during that time, I've been really getting to know the insects with my macro lens of my camera. And so what I'm going to present to you today is just a quick tour from some pollinators I've seen around our own property. About 20 years ago, my partner and I bought a parcel of land in South Phoenix, and we've been growing a habitat garden. And I also spent some time in nearby South Mountain Park, which is about a half a mile away from me. So the pictures you'll see are mostly from our habitat garden, but some from the park and also some from our neighbor's yard. So, and I'm organizing the talk by growth form of the plants. So we're going to start with the trees and then work our way into the annual plants. Now, this is desert ironwood, an amazing legume tree that attracts many pollinators when it bursts into bloom in spring. And one of them is the digger bee, a big bee. And I had an amazing experience this spring. I walked to the park at South Mountain, and I was right in the middle of a mating swarm, and there were hundreds of these digger bees flying about knee height, the males looking for the females, and I managed to photograph one poor female. You can see her tattered wings. There'd been a mating frenzy, and to the left you see a burrow. A lot of the bees nest in the ground or some in wood. These are ground nesters, and so here the males were waiting for the females to come out of their burrows. So that was quite an exciting event to witness. So the desert ironwood trees are really good for pollinators, for bees and butterflies. Also the honey mesquite. And actually, in our own yard, we have mostly the velvet mesquite, but the honey mesquite, the Prosopis glandulosa, seems to me anyway, to attract more of the bees. I think perhaps they have more nectar. But wow, I was seeing all sorts of cool bees, and I will say that I was relying on experts to help me identify these guys. And this is a Nomia bee. It's in the Halictidae, the sweat bee group. And these guys actually have a different mating ritual. They have a courtship where the males and females will kind of get to know each other before they mate. A little bit less traumatic than what that digger bee, what the other bee experienced. And then, so here's one of the Nomia bees on a mesquite flower. And then I was seeing all sorts of bees on these trees for a couple of weeks earlier in spring. By now, the mesquite pods are setting fruit, and we're going to take ours down and harvest them at the end of this week. Have them ground we've harvested them. We're going to have them ground into flour. But meanwhile, back in the spring when they were blooming, this was another really cool bee I saw. This is a fairy bee, and it's in the Perdita genus. And these are tiny little things, and they're basically just. It looks like they're swimming in a sea of the stamens and the pistils, and just adorable little faces. And then moving into some of the shrubs that are good for attracting various types of pollinators, be they bees or flies or butterflies. This one is Mojave sage. And here we have flies. And these are, the flies are kind of underappreciated, I think, compared to bees with respect to their roles as pollinators. They are responsible for quite a bit of pollination that goes on in various regions, including the Sonoran Desert. This is one in the flower fly group. And you can see their big eyes, and they often can be fast flyers too. Another really good shrub, if you want to attract the flies and the wasps and some of the bees, is graythorn. And this is a xero-riparian shrub in the Rhamnaceae family, Sisyphus obtusifolia. And it's a really cool shrub. It's got small flowers, and you can see in the upper right, there's the central nectar ring. That's the nectary. Doesn't have a lot of pollen, so it's not getting the bees that are there that are looking for the pollen-rich flowers, but it attracts maybe the male bees and some of the flies that are going after the nectar. And here, this is one of the bee fly that was drinking at that little nectar ring. So that's a nice shrub. It's still blooming right now out in the backyard. Another shrub we have in our yard that also grows in South Mountain Park, and this is, although this is the northern limit of its geographic range, is Bursera, which is elephant tree. This is Bursera microphylla. And here too, you can also see that central nectar ring, and not a lot of pollen, but the sugary sweetness for the flies and the wasps and some of the bees. So here's just a few that I saw on the Bursera this year. There's these tiny bee flies, which are in the Sharon genus. They're kind of generalists, like the honeybees. I've been seeing them at many different flowers. They're not specialists. Also a mass bee, which was really exciting. Those are little, very small bees that nest. They have their nests in wood. Some of the other bees are ground nesters, but these actually nest in piles of wood. So if you have a habitat garden, keep it messy, keep piles around, wood piles. And then another beautiful bee here is the striped sweat bees that have this just glistening metallic green, just gorgeous. And I happened to cross this a few days ago. When it was hot and windy, some of these bees were just hunkering down on the sunflower leaves and really didn't care that I was there getting close up and personal with them. But you can see just how gorgeous they are. Another really good shrub that's easy to grow is that attracts many different insects and throughout a long period of the year is the brittle bush, Encilia farinosa, during spring and then again in fall after the rains have arrived. These beautiful yellow flowers, and the Asteraceae are known for, in general, for being good pollinator plants. They have pollen as well as nectar. And this little bee doesn't even really, a lot of these bees don't have common names, but this one, you know, when you see them up close, they're just so fuzzy and adorable, giant eyes. I've truly come to appreciate them by being able to look at them with, someone said, with magnifying eyes through that macro lens. So that was just one of the bees I saw on the brittle bush, as well as the flies and butterflies. These digger bees, they're some of my favorites. They're just amazing little things, and they actually dig with their front legs like dogs would dig in the soil for their burrows. And the funny thing is, with some of these bees, we're seeing them on our yard, but I haven't really seen their burrows. Their nesting sites. Maybe they're on our neighbor's yard. I'm gonna have to do some more exploring in the neighborhood, see if I can find where exactly they're nesting. And cacti, of course, they're big flowers, lots of pollen. They're great spots for seasonally seeing the different types of bees that are emerging. This one's, this is a chain fruit cholla in our yard that we put in many years ago. It's getting big and tall now. And when its flowers open out, pop the rincon cactus bees, and the flowers open late in the day. So sometimes the timing is important. It's not just morning or noon. Sometimes it's evenings when you need to go out and see some of these bees. Just, if you're in tune with the phenology of the plants, you can more or less be in tune with the phenology of the bees. So these were just so much fun to watch, diving into these flowers, and then washing their face afterwards because they get sticky down there in the nectar and pollen. So that was really exciting to know that bees are in our yard. So because I mean, our house, we're in South Phoenix, we're surrounded by streets and urban areas, subdivisions, and so we've been tracking the creatures, the plants and the insects and the birds and mammals on our property to see just how much life we can support in this urban habitat garden. So I've just been pretty amazed as to how these creatures are finding us and persisting. And one in particular I got excited about were these squash bees. Moving into the herbaceous perennials now, and this is buffalo gourd. I planted seeds of this years ago after seeing it grow actually on the San Pedro River. And just an amazing sprawling plant. Grows from a tuber, has these big long trailing stems. And so I this year, since I've been peering into flowers looking for bees, I peered in and I saw what turned out to be a little squash bee, several squash bees. And they're in the Eucerini tribe. If I can get a bee to tribe, I'm usually pretty happy, much less to genus or species. And so these are in this longhorn bee tribe, and they are specialists on the cucurbits in this pumpkin family. And I was reading about them, and it turns out that the range of these bees originally was in Mexico, mostly, and southern Arizona, affiliated with the home range of the host plant, the Cucurbita fetidissima. But as people have gardened and spread squash around the U.S. and even into Canada, the bees have followed along. So somehow they're able to kind of keep up and track the spreading range of the flowers they need. And so these flowers open in the mornings. I'd be out getting up early and looking in the flowers to see the bees. And then later in the day, when the flowers close up, you can look in and see the bees all kind of sleeping, curl up around the central pistil, and they're just happily snoozing away. So that's fun. Let's see, another really cool plant in our yard is the passion vine. This is one that many people grow because they have gorgeous flowers. Some of them have edible fruit, and the flowers are huge. And one of the insects they attract are these giant carpenter bees, the Xylocopas. And you can see here the bee is big enough that the yellow pollen from the stamens is being captured on the bee's body. And then when you look at these little honeybees, by comparison, the western honeybees, they're so short, they're not capturing much of the pollen. So they're visiting, but probably not pollinating. But they're adorable to look at nonetheless. Some of the plants in our habitat garden we purposely planted, like the elephant tree and the passion vine. But many of them have just volunteered on their own. The birds have brought them in, or they've come in by wind, or maybe even some in the irrigation water. And one that is volunteered, and I'm so glad she did, is the annual sunflower. And you see this plant growing in ditches and on the river, in the riverbed, and I think it's part of a regionally adapted population. And the sunflowers just persist year after year in our yard. And they are a great place to look for butterflies and bees. And the one pictured here is in the Savastra genus. And you can see, I've been learning that one way to distinguish the bees species is by looking at where they carry their pollen. Some carry them on their, have hairs on their underside, some have them on their legs. Sometimes the hairs can be widely spaced if they're, which adapts them to carry large pollen grains versus small pollen grains. So paying attention to where on the bees they're carrying their pollen helps you determine which bee it is. This picture is from South Mountain Park earlier this year. It was just like last year, it was after many years of drought, we finally got a spectacular winter spring wildflower display. This is Phacelia, scorpion weed, Phacelia crenulata. And this is a little, on the right is a little sweat bee, and bee butts. What more can I say? They're adorable. So there were these little sweat bees on these annual plants. And then another one, oh, and here's the face of the sweat bee. And another one that I saw on these scorpion weeds is quite a specialist. Some of the bees are generalists. Some will go to a range of flowers in different families. This is a specialist. It's called, and this was actually a wasp. It's a pollen wasp, and this particular species is a specialist in this on the Phacelias. So beautiful coloration. It was exciting to see that. So that's kind of part of our challenge is in our yard. How many of these sort of specialist pollinators can we get? We'll see. Now, just to broaden the scope a little bit and realize that the world doesn't revolve around pollinators per se, there are many other insects out there that are associated with particular plants simply because they're feeding on them. And this is a gorgeous plant called Gara, and it was formerly in a different genus. It's been taxonomists have moved it into the Enothera genus in the evening primrose family. It's a beautiful plant. It's an annual. Well, some of them are annual. Some can live for a few years. But anyway, the insect here is in the stilt family, and there's a fairly close relationship between this insect and the plant. And I happened upon them during their mating frenzy. I saw them last year doing the same. So it's kind of fun to get to know where there are patches of plant and then get to know what kind of insects you might expect to see there if it's a good year. So it's been a really fun journey to connect myself with all these members of our plant and insect family in our own 4 acres and in various haunts around the neighborhood. So with that, I'm just going to open it up to a question or two. Hello?
Thank you, Julie. I am always amazed at your photos and everything that you have. It just shows such a wonderful diversity of everything around us, and we just have to look closer. We have a question from one of our attendees that would love to know what kind of camera you are using to capture your photos.
Yeah, well, a couple of years ago, I started out simply using a good quality cell phone with a clip-on Zenvo lens. And then for my birthday last year, Matt got me a point and shoot digital camera. It's a Olympus Puppy. Let's see, GT6, I think the model. So it's portable, it's waterproof, it's light. You can, and it has a macro lens setting. So it's not terribly expensive. And because it's so small, you can kind of get intimate with your photographic subject matter.
Oh, they're just wonderful. And be sure to look at some of the chat comments that are just applauding the wonderful presentation with your photos. That, again, just really draws us to come forward. Why don't you,
Stop sharing?
someone is asking, are we taping this? We are trying to record this. We'll see how successful we are at the end, but we will make this available to you, of course, if we can.
Okay,
Thank you, Julie. Could you stay online to answer questions at the end?
Yes, I will. Okay, goodbye.
Thank you. Be sure to there we go. All right, Cathy, if you would like to share your screen. And Cathy Weiss is from Audubon and will share some information about hummingbirds.
Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can see my screen. There we go. And Gail, since you're unmuted, can you hear me okay?
Yes, you
Okay,
are coming through loud and clear. Thank you.
Wonderful, that's great. So I am very happy to be here today. Gail knows that it's an easy sell for me to talk about birds because I love them. I work for Audubon, Arizona, out of the Rio Salado Audubon Center, not too far away from where Julie is in South Phoenix. And so Gail asked me to just say a couple words about hummingbirds. I wanted to start out with some information that can be pretty surprising to some people, in that hummingbirds are a New World family or group of birds. They are not found in the Old World at all, although there are some bird families that fill the same niche as hummingbirds, so pollinators. We have over 300 species of hummingbirds in the world, again, all in the New World. And our state is fortunate enough to have 16 different kinds right here. Many of those are found in southeastern Arizona, places like Portal, Sierra Vista, right along the Sierra Madre as it comes into the United States. So although we don't have all of those kind of specialty species, we do have 3 that are regularly encountered right here in the Phoenix area. And here they are. So we have the Anna's hummingbird, which is probably the most common here in Phoenix. We have black-chinned hummingbirds, and their range is a little bit different. They do migrate in the wintertime, so they go down to Mexico. So we start seeing them usually in March or so. And then we have the Costas hummingbirds, and those are my favorite. So the Costas are the smallest, and they have sort of this Fu Manchu purple collection of feathers that sort of go down like a long mustache. What's not to like about that? And you'll notice here that the males are at the top. The females are much drabber. I guess that's kind of an understatement. They're almost utterly drab. And so it can be very, very difficult for people that are watching hummingbirds at their feeders to identify them unless there are males around. There are some key differences. So the Anna's hummingbird will often have a couple red feathers on their neck that you will see as the bird turns its head into the sunlight. You might see some of that. Black-chinned hummingbirds are very clean. So you can notice in this picture, the Anna's hummingbird looks kind of sooty, almost a little dirty. Black-chinned hummingbirds tend to be very clean, very nice, pristine look. And then the Costas hummingbird have a different shape. They're very round, and you can see that with the male as well as the female down there. They also tend to be a little bit dingier. And we're going to talk a little bit about female hummingbirds and why they're so drab in a minute. But I did want to point out, oh, I do have some music. That is the sound of the Anna's hummingbird. I'm going to try to just skip that. There we go. All right, so these beautiful feathers do have a name, and it's called the gorget. The beautiful feathers are named after this medieval kind of decoration that the guards and warriors would have that protected their chest, but it was also considered an ornament. So the females do not have the gorget, and it behooves the females to be very, very plain, and we'll see why soon. There is a fourth species that will travel through Arizona. We typically will see this one right around 4th of July or so, and he's just migrating through, and this is the Rufous Hummingbird. These little guys travel thousands of miles. They nest up north in Alaska, and then they will winter down in Mexico, and they have to stop every 500 miles to rest. Well, I should hope so. I mean, when I'm driving a car, have to stop more often than that to rest. And these guys just make this amazing journey, and they do it twice a year. So we always know when they're passing through the valley because they are very aggressive at the feeders. So typically at Audubon, we'll get calls, oh my gosh, everything was peaceful in my yard, and now there's this little orange hummingbird, and he's just driving everybody away. And I have to say, well, if you were migrating as far as he is, you'd also want to fight your way to the food. But they are not here very long. I think they're a very beautiful bird. They're copper colored, fairly small compared to the others. And if you end up having them in your yard, having them stop by, you can consider yourself very lucky, and make sure to keep your feeders full and your native plants well watered so that they have plenty to eat while they're here. Oh, and this shows their migration paths. All right, so speaking of eating, we all know that hummingbirds are nectar feeders. That's why we're talking about them today as pollinators. They provide a very, very important service. And plants have evolved to serve the hummingbird and vice versa. The hummingbird's bill is like a big straw. They have a long tongue. They're able to suck the nectar. And then as they're visiting the flowers, they are getting pollen on their bills, which then they transfer to other plants. They also eat insects, and people are often surprised by this, especially the females during the breeding season. They rely on the insects for additional protein. And they also feed the insects to their young. So when you see a hummingbird kind of crazily hovering in the air, like seeming to pick things just out of the air, oftentimes they're eating gnats or another flying insect. So yeah, that's what they're doing. They have a very high metabolism rate. They're eating 3 times their weight, or a high metabolism rate, and they're eating 3 times their weight each day. So I know that if I had to eat 3 times my own weight, I would be doing like nothing but eating. And so that's why we do see the hummingbirds doing a lot of feeding, visiting a lot of flowers, making sure that they're getting their caloric needs met. So going back to the females, once the males mate with the females, their responsibility is over. And it's all up to the female to build the nest, to incubate the eggs, and then to brood the young until they fledge, which is a huge, huge responsibility. So you can see it really behooves her to blend in. And every springtime or late spring, usually like right around now, I'll get calls from people that'll be like, oh my gosh, I was out there trimming my plants. I cut a branch off. You know, we watched this hummingbird. She raised her young, they flew away. I cut this branch, and that's where the nest was. And oh my gosh, what do I do? Like, is she gonna need that next year? Is she gonna come back to it? And the short answer is no, because these little nests are just amazingly constructed vehicles for the young. So they're made of all this soft material, they're camouflaged with moss, and then they're wrapped with, and I'd make you guys answer this, but everybody's muted, they're wrapped with spider webs. And so when she lays her eggs, she lays them into a very tightly woven cup that's the size of about half of a walnut shell, and it's nice and tight. She's able to just wiggle right in there, sit on the eggs. The babies will hatch, and as they grow, the nest expands. So she cannot reuse that nest after the babies leave. It's just stretched out. It would be like me trying to put on the bicycle shorts that I used when I was pregnant. You know, it's just not going to work. So if you happen to accidentally cut the branch with the old nest, don't worry about it too much. You can rest assured that she's going to be building another nest. She will typically lay between 1 and 3 eggs, usually 2, seems like a good number. And female hummingbirds are very, very good parents. So if you have the opportunity to observe this miracle, I mean, honestly, it's just amazing that these birds are able to pull this off. So as the young grow, they leave the nest. They are still in the natal area for some time. So you may see this if you're feeding hummingbirds and paying attention. You may see that the young start making little short forays to your feeder. And you want to make sure at this stage that, because they're still learning to fly, that you keep cats inside, that you watch out for predators. Make sure that the feeders are high enough that a cat can't just jump up and get the birds while they're feeding. You just want to make sure that you do everything you can to keep these little guys safe. And you want to do that because it's a big, dangerous world for hummingbirds, and it's only getting worse, and there's tons of threat to them. You know, some of the big ones are listed here: climate change, chemical pesticides and herbicides, urban sprawl, and then invasive species. And this becomes an issue in our wildlands where we have invasive plants taking over areas that are more natural and choking out the plants that the hummingbirds are using. So just some things to keep in mind, and also to encourage you to help, you know, do what you can to help hummingbirds. And Audubon has made it easier for people in the last 2 years by putting together this native plant database, which is free to use. And if you just Google Audubon plants for birds, you'll come to this site, and you just put in your email address and your zip code, and you can search, and you will get a list of plants for your area. And it's not perfect. It seems to work better in the East, because it's searching on zip codes, where zip codes are smaller. You have counties that are much smaller and more homogeneous habitat types. Here in Maricopa, oh my gosh, you know, the first time I played with this, I got ponderosa pine for my yard, and I called them up and I'm like, you guys need to fix this. So anyway, it has gotten better in the last 2 years. If you were to notice an issue, please reach out, and there is a place to do that. This is managed out of our national office in New York. But you can see here, this is just a screenshot, that there's a couple different ways that you can be searching. The best results, you can search all types of plants, attract all type of bird, or you can specify that and select, I just want trees, I just want vines, I just want shrubs, whatever, and I just want to attract hummingbirds. And you can get a nice list that then will be emailed to you, and you can just take it, you know, on your phone to the nursery. There's also, and I went too fast, but there's also a tab for local resources. So that lists nurseries in your area based on your zip code that do carry native plants, or there's also some mail order options. And whenever possible, you want to get your plants locally, because those plants, when they have to survive here in this very hot place, this very extreme place, it's just better for the plants. They've already kind of gotten this hardening off. So it's better to support local businesses. So I just wanted to wrap up with a little information about Audubon, Arizona, and our center in South Phoenix. We are closed, which I'm sure doesn't come as a surprise to any of you. And we had preliminary plans to open at the end of this month, and we've put that off. So we're not going to be opening probably until September, and that really depends on what we see with COVID. We certainly don't want to put anyone at risk. So we are free admission. We're closed on Sundays and Mondays. But yeah, if you haven't been to the center, it's a great place to go. Great place to see. We're smack dab in the middle of the Rio Salado Habitat Restoration Area. So there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 16 miles of trails. The restoration area is along the Salt River, and it goes from 24th Street in the east to 19th Avenue in the west. So it's pretty extensive, and it's nice to keep track of this restoration project because things are really improving in the area. We do at the center have Plants for Birds sales. We have a small gift shop. There's gardens that you can visit and then, kind of see what plants would look good, get an idea of how they look when they're mature, that kind of thing. And then of course we do education and outreach out of the center and also in other parts of the state. So yeah, just ignore these hours for now. We'll keep you posted. The nice thing to remember though is that our trails are open. So the city of Phoenix manages the park, and they are still patrolling the trails and whatnot. So dawn to dusk, you can still go out there and hike around. We just aren't open. All right, well, thank you for having me. And I would like to open it up if there's any questions.
Thank you, Cathy. Again, an outstanding presentation. One of the questions that did come up while you were talking is if you could please repeat the website that you referred everyone to find plants, and you might want to add that to the chat list, when you get off as well. So.
Yeah, I believe it's just Plants for Birds. But I will add that. I'll double check and I will add it to the chat box.
Does anyone else have a question? Unmute yourself and feel free to ask. Okay, we're going to just jump in then. Sharon, do you want to add your presentation to the screen? Sharon is a master gardener in Central Arizona, and she's also one of our research associates for Southwest Monarch Study. And she'll be sharing some information about the Waystation at her place. Let me wrap this with Cathy Weiss's talk of saying that is one of the locations that we often see monarchs in the fall as well, right across the river. And Cathy was the person who pushed us to get our first grant, and that was adding milkweed to that area. So thank you, Cathy. Okay, Sharon, we're delighted to hear about monarchs in Central Arizona and other pollinators as well. You may need to unmute yourself. We can see your screen just wonderfully.
Now, can you hear me?
We can now. Thank you so much.
Okay. A new button to push. Anyway, I wanted to invite everyone to visit my Monarch Waystation. I live about 4 miles south of Camp Verde, and it's in the geographic center of Arizona, about where the arrow is touching. And as you can see, I'm really in a great monarch hotspot for sightings and for tagging. And I've been doing this for about 5 years and worked with Gail and other folks with Southwest Monarchs. These are both maps from the Southwest Monarch Study website. And I think the one that I just brought up is very interesting, because this is where we're finding all our recoveries and posting where they were tagged and where they were recovered. And the one that the arrow's pointing to that goes down to Mexico was actually tagged a couple of miles from my house. So we were all very excited here in Camp Verde to see that. I really wanted to stress that I have a very special place where I live, and it's unique in Arizona because we're about 500 yards from the Verde River. The Verde River is designated as one of 2 wild and scenic rivers in Arizona. And so, as you can imagine, it's quite an oasis. It attracts all kinds of migrating birds, animals, insects, wildlife. And one of the unique things about where we're located is there are ditches that were dug back in the 1860s to pull water out of the Verde River and bring it into the floodplain of the Verde. And a lot of this area is very fertile farming land, and that's what we're on. And the water comes through a ditch like this to our property, and we can flood the land on our property. We have about 2.5 acres, and we grow about 40 different kinds of fruit trees. We have a huge vegetable garden, and then we have my little untidy, messy butterfly garden. So these are some of the kinds of insects we're finding, and I'm not as great a photographer as Julie, and I probably am not certain of the identification of these bees, but one thing that we find is sunflowers grow very well around here and attract all kinds of pollinators. And then the lamb's ear, which is blooming right now, is attracting the carpenter bee. And then we have the two-tailed swallowtail butterflies. That's the Arizona state butterfly, by the way. We've seen a lot of them already this year. There's my Rufous Hummingbird, Cathy. We photographed them around the 4th of July, like you said. This is a Bell's Vireo. And one of the things that I think is interesting is part of a butterfly garden needs to be herbs, not just blooming sunflowers and other nectar-producing flowers, but herbs. The fennel is a great attractor, and I'll show you some more pictures in a minute. Then one of my favorite is a lynx spider, and this was a female that had a beautiful nest with zillions of little lynx spiders crawling around, and she's another one that's a great mother, taking care of them and feeding them, and we loved watching that. We also have a lot of bats that live in the Verde Valley and then migrate to Mexico over the winter. Back to herbs in the garden. This is a black swallowtail larva, first instar, and then it's starting to grow. Looks very much like a monarch caterpillar. And then this is one of my fennel plants with about 11 larvae all over it. So I really stress to people who are looking at starting a butterfly garden, don't forget herbs, because you'll enjoy them too. And you probably have enough to share with all these larvae that you're going to see on them. And that's the black swallowtail that emerged. Painted ladies, pipevine, swallowtail, and then the monarchs. And boy, when we see a monarch around here, we really get excited. They love the zinnias and cosmos that I grow, and those are my 2 favorite flowers to plant in a butterfly garden here in the Verde Valley because of they last a long time. They're starting to bloom now, and they will go until the first freeze, which for us is usually late October. So there's plenty of nectar. They reseed themselves. They're almost a weed in my garden. I mean, something that just takes over. And then horsetail milkweed, of course, is one of the big groups of milkweed I have in my garden. And these are a couple of larvae that were on them last year, monarch larvae with a metalmark butterfly enjoying the nectar. I wanted to show you a queen butterfly because they look so much like a monarch, but if you see the white spots on the orange, that's a queen, and they're a little bit smaller than a monarch, but they sure do look closely to a monarch. This again has the white spots on orange. It's easy to make the mistake of calling that a monarch. I've done it myself. So this is my designated area for my butterfly garden. And we have an old barn, and then our neighbors have a big junk pile here. So it's a perfect place where I could kind of let something go wild and crazy with my pollinator plants and milkweed. And this was when I started it, and you can see I've used flood irrigation that day, but I had a lot of milkweed planted in this area and back here, and I found a vintage chair to sit in while I watch my garden grow and look for monarchs. So this was probably early spring when I started working on it a couple of years ago. That's my chair. Then by mid-June, this is what it was starting to look like. Everything was growing, taking off, and blooming. And then a couple of weeks later, this was probably about August 1st. It's just in full bloom with the zinnias and the cosmos, blanket flower, fennel. Then we went on vacation and we're gone much of August. And when we came back, this is what it looked like. I couldn't even, get to my chair. I had to have a machete to get in there and dig it out. But you can see that this is just a wonderful place for monarchs to find the milkweed and breed, and all kinds of other birds and plants and insects. This is a picture from looking at it from the other end of the garden. I just took this a few days ago, and every flower from the hollyhocks to the blanket flowers had some kind of bee or bug or ant or small butterflies all over the place. Back here is the milkweed, and I think it's interesting. This is all horsetail milkweed. I originally started this milkweed patch with about 3 or 4 plants that I had dug up from a field across the road from our house. And now there are thousands of them because they've been spreading all through this garden. Most of the people who live in central Arizona don't have the Verde River to irrigate their land. So a lot of residential areas even require very native landscaping. There are lists of plants that you can even plant, and sometimes milkweed is refused. You're not supposed to plant it, but you can see a few plants that have flowers that could be pollinator attractors, but most of the time people who live in this kind of development are going to need to do creative things to have a butterfly garden. And so I really recommend having container gardens, and you can plant milkweed in the middle with lots of other annuals around it to attract butterflies and pollinators. Then this is a friend of mine. She has the similar landscape, and she's really gone crazy with her container garden. She's got her herbs down here, tomato plants, all kinds of flowers growing. So she has a lot of options, and she's attracting a lot of butterflies. And then hanging baskets are another great one. This is for attracting a swallowtail butterfly and my lab puppy who's thinking there must be something good to eat in there. As far as milkweed, these are the ones that are very popular for central Arizona, and the 2 that are underlined are the ones that are most successful in my garden. This is showy milkweed, horsetail milkweed, and Arizona milkweed. One thing we do at Southwest Monarchs is try to collect seeds, and they're just beautiful to watch and look at. And this is the point where we would try to bag them up and collect them. And usually in the spring we have some plant sales or events where we're sharing our seeds with others and helping people start milkweed. If you help us collect seeds, be sure to determine what kind of milkweed you're collecting it from, though, so we don't get it misidentified. I never use herbicides or insecticides in my garden if I can help it. But one of the most common predators of milkweed is the tussock moth caterpillar, and they can be very destructive. There'll be a huge group of them and they can just mow down a plant completely. So we recommend picking them off, never spraying or anything, but either picking them off or just cutting the leaves off. And Gail always reminds me that maybe it's a good idea to keep one of your milkweed plants just for the tussock moths. The other one that's common is the milkweed bug, and the damage they do to the plant is they will get on these seed pods and suck the juices out of the pod before the seeds are mature, so they can destroy the seeds, but the monarchs don't seem to be bothered by them. And the last one are aphids. This is the oleander aphid, these little orange dots. And I watched a monarch lay an egg just right next to the aphid, and they all seem to get along. The monarch did hatch successfully and continue eating on the plant. So we usually say to people, don't try to remove the aphids, or if you don't see any eggs, for sure you don't see any, you can just gently wash them away if they're bothering you, but you really don't need to worry about them. If you're interested in getting or designating your area as a monarch waystation, it really means two things. You're making a commitment to grow at least 10 plants, milkweed plants, and also to keep a planting of nectar producing flowers that will keep monarchs fed through the fall, but all year round, really. So it's a good thing to do. We have about 300 monarch waystations in the state of Arizona now, but you can see from this map that most of them are on the eastern side of the Rockies. But if you're interested in this, the Southwest Monarch Study can help you with that. So that's it, Gail.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Information about the Monarch waystations are on our website, but does anyone have any questions? I think one person said that you have a lot of wildlife that come in and eat the milkweed. Is there any way to help protect them?
Yes. When we're planting milkweed, especially if it's in those containers, it's a good idea to put some chicken wire around it until the plant is established. I have fencing around my property, so we've not had a problem with javelina or deer, but people who don't have that luxury, like the Gessners who garden in Prescott and have a lot of milkweed in containers, always have some kind of protection around it until the milkweed's established. What was the other question?
I think that was the main one. If anyone has a question, just unmute yourself, or we could wait till the end. I hope we answered the question about monarch waystations okay.
Yeah, and I see someone said, how can I come to see your waystation? You're welcome to come. I think my email is on the website, or we can give it to them today. But if you're in the area of Camp Verde, we have another waystation at the library in Camp Verde, and then I think there are about 3 or 4 in the Sedona area.
And maybe you could add that to the chat, or the person that's interested could, you can send your, we can give that information at the end. How about if we do
Okay.
that?
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. That was great. I feel like I'm really inspired to go out and do something here. We have David Smith talking about seed balls. He's retired from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and has done a lot of work with seed balls. So we thought we would invite him to share his expertise with us today. Thank you, Dave. And make sure you unmute yourself before you speak as well.
Okay, Gail, can you hear me?
I can now. Thank you.
Okay, I'm still, you guys have to excuse me. This is my first Zoom meeting, and I had to actually, to reduce stress, sent my presentation to Gail so she can operate it just so I don't mess it up. So go on to this first slide here, and it's just, this is pretty much going to be an instructional presentation. I don't have a whole lot of pretty pictures of seed balls. There's not much to them to look at, but generally seed ball, it's a ball made of clay and a compost mixture with whatever seed you want to plant inside of it. They're tossed or placed in specific locations that are desirable and suitable for plants, and that's an important consideration. Is a lot of people, when seed balls were first developed, there's called guerrilla gardening, where you can take a clay ball with compost and tomato seeds or squash seeds or whatever, pitch them over the fence into a vacant lot and come back in 3 months and harvest tomatoes or whatever. That was kind of the initial start of these. So that's it's gotten more where we're now using them, or they're more popular now for planting native plants. Now, the advantages of using a seed ball versus simply sowing the seeds is the seed ball protects the seeds from rodents, birds, and ants. Ants especially are big seed predators. Seeds and ball distributed in fall will naturally cold stratify over winter. Many of our native plant seeds, especially milkweed, need to be cold moist stratified before they'll germinate. And as you can imagine, try sowing winds. I'm up here in Flagstaff, and today's a rare day. The wind's not really blowing that much. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, try sowing seeds on a windy day. And I could point it out, your aim's a lot better on where the seed ends up. So you can be really specific on where you put it. Next slide, please. It's a great activity for young people. These are students from Sonoma Middle School a couple years ago for two sessions in the spring. Not only did I have them raising monarch caterpillars to adults so we can tag them, but I had them also making seed balls for me. And I was, we were planting primarily the horsetail milkweed, the Asclepias subverticillata, because that is by far the most abundant milkweed species up here in Flagstaff. So I figured it had more of a generalized, habitat need for successful germination and an establishment. So I had these students, we made the balls, and we used a mixture of a compost, and I found out that it's much easier if you buy a bag of compost, you sift through it to get all the larger stuff out. It mixes up quite a bit. Can I have the next slide? Okay, important considerations for using seed balls. And let me just back up. What we're doing with the Sonoma students is we're putting only 3 or 4 seeds per ball. And I'll discuss the importance of that here in a second here. Seed choice depends on requirements of a particular species. Now, if you go on Google and you Google seed balls, and especially if you go Google seed balls for monarchs, there's a gazillion companies out there, websites, that are more than willing to sell you seed balls for monarchs and everything else. The commercially made seed balls often contain numerous plant species, seed species, which might not all require the same growing conditions. I mean, you have some seeds, of course, that will do better in dry sites versus some that are going to do better in wet sites, some that need stratification and some don't. And I think in a lot of cases, these get mixed up. Commercially made seed balls don't contain the seeds, may not contain seeds of native plants to your area. So you might not have very much success. I mean, some of these companies, they might, if you look at, like, if you go to Home Depot and you'll see these big wildflower pasture mixes, and if you look at the ingredients, I mean, so many of them are from the Midwest. A lot of prairie grassland flower species, you know, coneflower and a number of others that, one, they're not native here, and two, they might not likely do well in some of our areas like Flagstaff or down in Phoenix or wherever. And another concern too is commercially made seed balls often contain too many seeds to be planted in a tiny spot. I mean, some of these seed balls contain hundreds of seeds, and you know, you look at a seed ball that's about 1 inch in diameter, that's quite a bit of seed that that you're going to try planting in one area. Let me just make one more comment. If you do purchase seed balls off the internet, I looked at a number of these, and there are actually some websites that would probably be worth checking out. I mean, closely examine the website. Do they provide specific instructions? The initial thought with seed balls is that you just kind of Johnny Appleseed them. You just kind of walk along with a bag of them, and walk as you're walking down a hiking trail or a pipeline or around your neighborhood, and you just pitch, and you're just pitching seed balls left and right. And you know, like I said, it's got to, you know, you got to take a lot of thought in where you're placing these seed balls. And some of these seed ball companies do provide specific instructions. You know, they'll mention actually planting the seed ball, not just throwing it, but just actually planting it in suitable areas. So I would put a lot of stock in that. It's probably a good legitimate, might be a very good legitimate source for seed balls if they're providing information. And I did find one site that actually provided a lot of pros and cons on the use of these seed balls and how careful you have to be, and really in order for them to be successful. Okay, and next slide. I mean, because I was saying custom seed balls might be the best thing to do yourself. I mean, you can determine what seeds are used based on the native plant species in your area. And I think it was in Cathy's presentation, she mentioned the native plants database that Audubon has, where you plug in your zip code. Another really good one's also called Native Plant Finder, which is from the National Wildlife Federation. They also have it where you enter your zip code, and it'll provide you a list. So that might be a good way to determine what native species you might want to try planting in your area. The Native Plant Finder website actually ranks the plant species by how many different butterfly and moth species use those plants as host species, which is important, of course, if you're trying to attract nesting birds to your yard or to your area. I mean, caterpillars especially are incredibly important for nestling birds. And back to this, if possible, you can actually collect the seeds from native plants in your area in the fall. I collect a lot of different native plant seeds on fall dog walks. I always carry those brown paper bags that you pack your lunch in. I pack a few of those, and if I find you know, different plants that are going to seed, I'll collect a handful of those. You know, and the bags are great because you can write down where, you know, what this plant was, the date you collected it, and where you collected it. And then I just store them in my garage so they naturally cold stratify. So by collecting the native seeds from your area, and I think Sharon mentioned this too, the importance of native plants is, especially those locally, is they actually have what it takes to really, you know, live in your particular area there. I mean, you know, you can buy a coyote mint that's from a nursery up in Oregon, which might not, you know, might have higher moisture content, say, than a coyote mint that you collected locally here. And the most important thing with making your own seed balls is you can customize it to the best degree to increase its success when planted. Next, please. Now, the basic seed ball recipe includes powdered or modeling clay, dry and powdery compost. Like I said, I like sifting it so it gets really nice and powdery, so it really mixes well with the clay. Your desired plant species, and this is something someone mentioned on the web too, is cayenne chili powder. Like I said, one of the benefits of using a clay ball is it prevents birds and rodents from, from eating the seed. But then someone mentioned, well, they still had issues with rodents gnawing into a seed ball and eating the seed. So, yeah, I spray my vegetables right now, my squash and my cucumber and all, with a cayenne pepper mixed with water, because I have a very persistent ground squirrel that's wreaking havoc in my garden right now. But cayenne is very effective for squirrel protection. So that might be something else. You go to Sam's Club and buy an industrial sized bottle of cayenne pepper and mix it in with the clay. Then you definitely want to make sure you might want to wear gloves then if you're going to be mixing these clay balls by hand. Next, please. Custom use ideas. One of the issues that I had with the clay balls that we were using, I spread them out all over for 2 years, and I had very, very poor success. And I think up here, one, we've had 2 pretty dry years, and I think the clay ball just hardened as a rock and just didn't receive adequate moisture for it to break down and germinate. So I'm thinking this year that, the typical recipe you see online is like almost 50-50 mixed by weight of clay and compost. And I think this year I'm going to try just using as much clay, maybe 10% of the mixture being clay, just enough to hold the seed ball together so it can be placed, and it's hard enough maybe to still protect it from birds and rodents. Well, I'm going to put cayenne in it too, but see if that helps break it down more. And a large seed ball might not dissolve enough to allow the seed to receive outside moisture if there's low precipitation. So I'm thinking go to, really much smaller seed balls, maybe the size of my thumbnail. I mean, a lot of the seed balls that you'll purchase are, half an inch to an inch in diameter, and that just might be too large. So I'm going to try next year with smaller seed balls with a few seeds in each one, rather than a few larger seeds with lots of seeds. Like I said, too many seeds will cause a lot of competition and likely poor plant vigor if those do survive beyond sprouting. And I was also going to go with 1 plant species per seed ball, so you can select appropriate sites based on that particular species need. Next, please.
Okay, that is the last one I have on your.
That's the last. No, I should have.
Oh,
Oh, there we go.
got it.
All right, that's good.
Okay.
Okay, one thing I'm going to talk about a little bit on some of the stuff that I've learned with using seed balls for milkweed. Seed balls are promoted as a means to increase milkweed abundance to benefit breeding monarchs. The problem with a lot of the milkweed species seeds is they require light for germination, and they're often planted on the substrate surface when planted in a warehouse. And if you look at that slide, that's a container in a greenhouse. That's a cute little showy milkweed seed all snuggled into the substrate, but it's exposed to light. And I'm thinking that a lot of these, it's the same thing with Subverta salata, the horsetail milkweed that we determined. I volunteered to NAU Research Greenhouse and help them plant milkweed seeds every year. And milkweed seeds just might not like being buried inside of a seed ball, which might be what main answer on why I've had such poor success. So that's why I'm continuing to experiment more. Can I have the next slide, Gail? Yeah, here's some I kind of played around with in my yard. Those are seed balls on the left there, and I got a little tag marking where I put them. I just kind of put them I kind of buried them slightly down in a depression, but I left the top part exposed so they can gain more moisture. And we had a dry year up here, and I was actually able in a couple cases, I had some on the north side of my house still had snow, so I would even throw shovel loads of snow on top of those seed balls, and I still had very poor success. I had actually no success in horsetail milkweed popping up. So I'm still back to the drawing board on these. And this is, it's just kind of a fun process. There's a lot of learning involved here. like Julie said, it's kind of fun. The more you get involved with pollinators and identifying bees, it's fun. Next, please. Okay, next thing on my drawing board is I might take a wet clay ball and roll it on top of the seed so they adhere to the outside of the seed ball instead of being inside. And I'm definitely going to use cayenne pepper in those balls to help reduce rodent damage. Or I might very carefully insert the seeds very shallowly into the side of the ball. So if the clay ball does get enough moisture, it does start breaking down. Some of the seeds might get, would hopefully receive some exposure to light and start germinating. But like I said, the best part about this process for me is to experiment. And if you do decide to do this, by all means, record your process, process, planting site characteristics where you plant and how successful they are. And I thought of a few other things I wanted to mention too, is when you're selecting your seeds, your planting site for these, whether it's on your, it's in your yard, in your garden, or like we're in your native landscaping, or if you're doing it, like along the roadside, carefully place the seed ball. If you toss a seed ball into a really dense grassy area, wildflower seeds typically have a hard time competing against grasses in a lot of cases, and throwing seed balls into dense grass probably isn't going to be very successful. And the same thing too is if the ground is really bare. I mean, why is consider why is the ground bare? Is it because the soil's so compacted that nothing can grow there? Is it a heavy traffic area? Is it too gravelly or too sandy to really support seeds? So, put a lot of thought. I think the best way to do it is kind of treat it like it's your vegetable garden. You don't just take a handful of cucumber, tomato, pepper, and corn and squash and just pitch it out into your garden and hope for the best. You carefully select the sites based on the specific directions on the seed packet for the best success. And I think that's kind of put a lot of thought into using seed balls, and hopefully that would really helpfully increase their success in whether you're using for milkweeds or other native plants. So that's the end of my presentation. If anybody's any question, I'd gladly stick around.
Anyone that has questions, feel free to put your video on so we could see you, ask questions. I'm going through the chat because I was going through his slides. I wasn't able to keep up with all of them. Species of milkweed or plants, like Dave said, a good idea is to look locally. There are some recommendations on our website, in addition to the ones you mentioned. For Monarch Waystations, there's plant guides for the different elevations. So you have some springboards in multiple directions. Dave, anything else on that?
No, I think, like I said, the best thing, optimal thing would be, of course, is collecting local seed and using that and making sure that it's, if you do collect from a particular species, is look at, whether or not there's particular germination requirements for that plant. I mean, does it need to be cold, moist, stratified? You might have to put it in wrap it in wet paper towel and put it in your refrigerator for 30 to 60 days before you plant it. The concern I have with the seed balls is they might be exposed to cold, but kind of depending on if the seed also requires moisture. If it's inside a dry seed ball, it might not be getting that moisture until much later in the season. So, like I said, it's just a lot of experimentation.
It is. And here's another question for you. Do you ever use native soil for better success? Rather than
I've always kind of, based on the information I've seen on the internet, I've used compost just as kind of like a nutrient boost for the seed itself. And I've actually seen where people have recommended using, inserting mycorrhizal fungi, that they say you can buy, like in garden stores, but a lot of that kind of fungi, it's from somewhere else. It might not do as well in our areas. And one of the actually researchers at NAU told me is if you want a good mycorrhizal fungi, for example, for horsetail milkweed, the best place to get that would be the soil from around a horsetail milkweed, because there would be that fungus associated with that plant already. But no, I've not bothered with the regular soil. I think that, just the compost helps break down, and it provides good nutrient boost for the seed to start germinating and hopefully initiate growth.
I think some of that could vary by the soils in different parts of the state, which would be kind of a fun thing. I kind of look at some of the soils have a lot of clay content down in the valley here, so it could be all location, and it might be interesting to try different mediums, like you were saying, you know what I mean, based on that. Any other questions? We love being able to share information with you. I hope this information on pollinators has inspired your week. We shared some information online on our Facebook page, Southwest Monarch Study. We also, I am trying to get a person's name up. If you have pictures of pollinators you'd like to identify, this week we're going to do a push for pictures of pollinators on our Facebook page. Feel free to post them, and anyone who's participating today, if you'd like to jump in and ID. And also Jesse Hoteling used to live here in the valley. He just moved back east, but he's offered to help out on our Facebook page. He's an urban entomologist. He has an entomology degree from Purdue. He'll be watching our Facebook page to help ID anything that you would like help with as well. Any other questions? One new message. Okay. Thank you. I think the presentations today, it's based on these outstanding presenters. I wish we could all applaud you, but I know we all are where we are, and just thank you so much. We are hoping to do some more presentations. We'd like to talk about monsoon planting. There's things we could get in the ground or treat in our yard, deadheading flowers in time for the fall migration. So there's plenty available for our monarchs and other pollinators as they're winging their way through too. So yes, look on our Facebook page. We'll send out notices if you participated today as well. Thank you. Thank you to everyone. I'm inspired by everyone. So thank you. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy Pollinator Week.
Thank you, Gail.
Thanks. Take care, everyone.